Why did I choose philosophy? Easy question. For the money and the women. Alright, hey there. So this is going to be my first video. And what I want to talk about is a philosophical topic. I want to talk about morality. It's extremely important philosophically. And philosophy pretty much encompasses everything, so thereby it's just important all around. Not everything I say in this video will necessarily be original. Quite a bit of it has been said before by various philosophers from different epochs and YouTube intellectuals. Much of it might come from theoretical BS and other channels. But I want to talk about the meaning. The meaning of morality has varied greatly. Quite a bit of it has been attributed to this innate concept that people seem to have of right and wrong. Now, as other people have pointed out, right and wrong can easily be subjected to ought and ought not, except for this has no descriptive power whatsoever. So how can we describe it further? Now, this is where a theist might say, well, a thing is good because God commands it. Now, this might seem initially to solve the problem, but all it does is creates a loop, and it puts the definition of morality into meaninglessness. For if a theist were to be pressed with the famous Euthyphro dilemma of does God command a thing because it is moral, or is it moral because God commands it, they might be left in a little bit of a standstill. Because on the one hand, if God commands a thing because it's moral, that means that it is not in fact defined by God's will. And if it is moral because God commands it, that means rather that it's meaningless and it's just what God is. It's just like saying morality is God. God is like God. God is not moral. It's a tautology. It's circular. Now, in an atheistic worldview, it tends to be the case that they will try to find different definitions of what right and wrong should be. Many atheists propose that it is the flourishing of society, such as Sam Harris, or the well-being of humans, happiness, love, prosperity, that sort of a thing. However, I would propose that I wouldn't want to call this morality. Now, why is that? It's because, to me, morality is associated with the words right and wrong. And even though words are essentially meaningless aside from the context we put them in, it's important to note that right and wrong do have objective meanings that we associate with them with consistently that mean different things than morality. Right and wrong do have this objective quality about them, such as twice 2 is 4, something we might call right. Twice 2 is 3 is not right, that's wrong. So when we associate it with our morals, it's very easy to get this sort of self-justified feeling as an atheist, to call a thing right or wrong, even though we're not defining it as objectively right or wrong in the sense of a mathematical equation or the answer to a formula. So I think it can be very misleading in that sense, which is why in describing these terms I would stick away from morality, right and wrong altogether, clump it all the way into meaninglessness, and stick with values. To me, it's much more simple. Now, I know some theists might say, well, even though God, defining morals as God, is a tautology, as God wanting it, it's because we can define morals as something realistic such as happiness, as an atheist might do, except for then we know that if there is this perfect being, if God does know everything, it would only make sense that we should want to follow him and obey him. So that if you do believe in God, it makes sense to follow his morals. And this is fairly self-consistent, except for I still don't think that this really answers the question of whether or not the morals are actually right or wrong. For if God is perfect, you have to work perfect around, and it's just flipping the definition of morality, and you have basically you're in the same wallowing place as the atheist. Now, it's important to think about what it means to say whether or not a thing ought to be done or ought not to be done. Now, for example, it doesn't make sense to say you ought not to kill, respective of any sort of conditional statement, such as, you ought not to kill if you don't want to go to prison, or you ought not to kill if you want to retain psychological health. But as an absolute, which is the classical sense that right and wrong is portrayed in, it makes no sense whatsoever to say those sorts of things. So that's the main reason I want to shy away entirely, toss aside the words right and wrong. I think it'll bring much more truth to the semantics of our ideas, inconsistency with the original and other definitions of right and wrong. So is the atheistic worldview of morality, is that something that's consistent and objective? Now, I don't think it's objective in a sense of absolute. That's meaningless, although certain philosophers such as Sam Harris or Christopher Hitchens, if you can call them philosophers, they propose that it is objective, but they generally have a much different meaning than what's usually meant, especially in comparison to the Christians they're debating. Totally different meanings of objective. They don't connect whatsoever. I think the reason lots of people are surprised, or they don't fully comprehend the idea of an objective morality that isn't just what you ought to do, respective of conditionals, the reason that they find this hard to grasp is because it's not objective in the sense that we think of. The sense that we normally think of it is, you ought to do this. Why? Because you ought to do it. It's as simple as that. It's circular. It makes no sense whatsoever, but it's the general feeling that's been instilled in people. I think this is something that's objectively not true, and I think it's something that, on intellectual grounds, is something that's generally untrespassed on in the public eye. And I think the intellectuals need to sort of bring, or at least the atheistic intellectuals, need to bring this to the forefront, make people realize that there are no fully objective moral standards. Not in the sense that you should kill people, because whenever you say morality is subjective, you always have the guy coming up and saying to you, well, then everyone will just run around and kill each other. Why should anyone go to jail if they're not fully objectively accountable for their actions? And I think you can put it like this in a response to that. In a court of law, the only difference between a court of law that upholds subjective morality and a court of law that upholds objective morality is that in the court of law of the subjective morality, there will be no sword of righteousness that you can bring down on the people who commit the crimes. All you can do is admit to them, honest, purely, truly, that we as a people have decided we do not enjoy it when someone else murders. That the murder of one person endangers everyone's safety. It would allow a free-for-all, a bloodbath. It would be ridiculous and absurd to societal standards. This is why courts are important, not because it's inherently wrong. Peace and love.